Thank you very much. Welcome to Deakin. My name is Simon Han. I'm the CEO of DeakinPrime. Very pleased to be hosting today's events and welcome a wide range of clients and friends of DeakinPrime. You might notice from the banners that we're actually celebrating our 25-year anniversary this year, which for me is an outstanding achievement, one we're organising a range of events around, but also very humbling to have been involved in an organisation with such longevity that's provided workforce development solutions for so long. At Deakin, we're very pleased to have industry partnerships where we offer continuing professional development opportunities for people in the workforce, and that's been the role or the job of DeakinPrime over that 25 years. So we've enjoyed working with a lot of you, and we'd like to enjoy working with a lot of you here today. That's enough of the plug. We're here today to hear from Stuart Taylor. And look, just to say off the bat, it's a wonderful attendance. Georgie, who's been running this, I think we oversubscribed within about 48 hours of the invitation going out. We've never had such interest in an event, and it comes down to certainly the speaker, but also the topic. And it's one of those really compelling concepts, that of assertive humility. And I think the compelling proposition is that it's got that sort of positive tension between the two concepts. And ultimately, I think we all aspire to make decisions based on values that are for the greater good rather than our own self-interest. But it's not always easy to do that in a challenging, competitive environment. So I think that's probably what's drawn a lot of us in today, because certainly what Stuart's going to share with us is that approach, or that concept of assertive humility. DeakinPrime's been fortunate to work with Stuart across a range of client projects for over 8 years now. He's been a very good friend of DeakinPrime's. We're pleased to have him here today, so I'll just give you the background on Stuart, and then I'll hand over to him to get straight into things. So Stuart is a director and board member of the Resilience Institute, which is a global organisation that works with organisations and people to liberate human performance sustainability. Closer to home, Stuart also leads the Resilience Institute in Australia, and he's an experienced management consultant with a focus on resilience, stress and cognition. Prior to joining the Resilience Institute, Stuart was an associate director with KPMG Management Consulting and has worked in a number of senior roles in global corporations. In 2002, while Stuart was on the corporate ladder climbing express, he was diagnosed with brain cancer, and with a prognosis of 2.5 years. And far from accepting that prognosis, Stuart embarked on a journey back to physical, emotional and spiritual health. And part of his journey included creating the Resilience Institute in Australia. Stuart's road to full recovery has been one of enormous personal growth. He lives the principles recommended by the Resilience Institute. Very impressively, in 2013, Stuart published Assertive Humility, Emerging from the Ego Trap. This is the book plug, Stuart, which I would highly recommend to everyone. But it's about Stuart's story and the lessons before, during and after his cancer journey as he witnessed that personal growth. So really looking forward to Stuart sharing his story with us today, and I'll hand over to him now. Thanks, Stuart.
A bit too formal, isn't it? Good afternoon. Well, it's just a welcoming greeting, isn't it? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our discussion on a topic that I really do hold dear to my heart, and it is something that I have spent a hell of a lot of time exploring experientially, as well as theoretically, as well as practically, and I'd like to take you through some thoughts on this topic, which, according to all reports, is impossible, doesn't exist, and I've been told this a number of times on LinkedIn discussions, and lots of interesting conversations there if you wish to join in on some of them. I'd actually like to tell you about this concept through the lens of my journey over the last 44 years. I'm not saying I'm 44 years old, I'm just saying this is the time I've just chosen in my life to go through that experience. But I'd like to tell you the story through the lens of the 4 hats that I've worn during this time. And then, of course, after that, I'd like to debrief you on the results of the assessment that each of you have done, or most of you have done. We'll definitely get to that. Before we get into it, though, who did manage to turn up at 500 Burke Street? Can I just check? Yeah, so congratulations to these people for managing to get up here nicely on time. Very resilient behaviour, so fantastic for every one of you. I'd have to say, how fantastic is this thing called life? It definitely took brain cancer to get me well and truly focused on that, and also to understand that we only have so many eye blinks in this life to use. The bigger question might be, what are we doing with those eye blinks? And what are we doing each day that puts our spirit into action as we do approach and participate? I had a fantastic childhood, and some would say a perfect childhood. Anyone else have a perfect childhood? Can I just check? There we go, Fiona. Perfect childhood, nurturing parents, fantastic extended family, beautiful country town, absolutely loved it. And I typify this early part of my life with my first hat, which is still this is the original hat, by the way. This is my little cub hat. If you were to look quite closely, Clem, you would see that it's all moth-eaten. Oh, yeah. I don't know how to stop this, but it's happened. And this is my first hat, which represents ducksing every subject I ever touched. More merit awards than one could ever expect to get as a cub. Fantastic. Accolades beyond dispute, no question. And I think it's interesting, as one is living this life, the addiction cycle that can follow from this. Is anybody addicted to accolades? I know you are, Maxim, thank you. Anybody else? And in a way, it's interesting how we move through this beautiful thing called life, this perfection, but also perhaps in naivety of youth, don't recognise the implications and perhaps the two-edged sword that is presenting itself. Over time, I started to get to know this. I had this life that many of you might have a photo like this. I don't know, maybe you didn't have the shorts that I did, or the legs, and I suspect my legs haven't changed that much. In fact, they haven't grown that much, but there you go. But a fantastic time to be alive. And when you start to look at that two-edged sword, though, you can see some of the alternate options that start to present themselves. And it does link into this word called ego. And yes, a hat is an ego, I get that. There's skin that you put on that starts to drive your choices and drive your options and behaviours. And I absolutely felt, certainly on the intrapersonal front, my tendency towards overcaring was huge. How did this manifest? And I'm going to take you through a couple of options here, see if you can subscribe to some of these. One of my favourite options was the perfectionism obsession. Has anybody managed to rack this one up? I think it's quite a good one. And if you get a whole cocktail here, you can come up the front with me and we'll do the presentation together. Definitely the perfectionism obsession was one. And in a way it's still there, but perhaps I'm much more aware of it now and able to see it coming and able to dispute it and become a little bit more realistic. What does the perfectionism obsession do? Any suggestions? What's the perfectionism obsession do? Sorry? OCD. Sorry? OCD. Yeah, sure. And so can drive performance, but can also suck joy out of yourself. And so there's, again, that two-edged piece. The second obsession that I managed to nurture into the mix was a fear of failure obsession, which I think is quite a good combo. If you haven't got those two together, explore that. And so, yes, I was getting lots of accolades, and yes, I was getting all of these fantastic awards, but what would happen if I didn't get them? What would that mean? And what would that mean to me as a person? And so we start to look at this, we start to question issues around self-worth and how would I look, how would my ego look in the eyes of others? But it wasn't just the obsessions that were driving some of these challenges. It was also the right-hand side in terms of over-caring about the views of others. And I think this is one of the most common debilitators of one's resilience. And it certainly has been for me an opportunity to work out how better to care, but not to over-care about the views of others. Yeah, nice combo. Is anybody wearing this hat at the moment? Can I just check in who's coming with me on this journey? We've got a few on the journey. Excellent. I probably should share with you, the first time I told this story was at a conference I ran with PricewaterhouseCoopers. You've probably heard of them, a bit of an accounting firm down the road, and with their prospective partners. And we get to this point in the story and everyone in the room is nodding their head going, yep, that's how I've lived my life. Superhero in the classroom, ducks to everything, life is good and maybe questionable. So let's see the implications here. Absolutely manifest, and this is documented evidence that says, you know, life was good, but occasionally a little bit sad. And it's okay, it's sad, isn't it? It's a sad photo, but I love it. And who wouldn't? Who wouldn't love that photo? Excellent. So, change of hats. As I left my childhood, and literally left my childhood, I decided to don my second hat, which was my military officer hat, as I joined the Air Force and became a man. Literally became a man. And what an absolute ride, fantastic. Australian Defence Force Academy, you've heard all the stories, they're true, and in all good ways and not so good ways. Had a stunning time, still have the best mates from that time, training to be a leader, and then getting out in the Air Force bases to lead folk that were about twice your age, if not older, who had things like marriages going on and marital issues that they come to talk to you about. But either way, as a leader, there you were. Fantastic time. And I think also a comment I'll never forget, being told at the Australian Defence Force Academy, ladies and gentlemen, you are the cream of Australia's youth. Excellent. Let's keep it coming. I'm really enjoying this. So as we start to build this a little bit further, with this hat on, I hung on to the obsessions and the dependencies that I had previously. Why let them go? They were sort of kind of part of who I was and what I was doing. And so still had those nicely in check. I decided I'd add a few more. The fairness obsession was one that I thought I'd add as well. Does anybody think life should be fair? I've got some data on this, so don't lie. We're going to show this data later on. So we will see this. Life should be fair. My father died when I was 20 years old, just as I joined the Air Force. This is just unbelievable. How can this possibly happen? 49 years old and my father dies. This isn't right. This was the first true disaster that I'd had in my life. Nobody should lose their father at that age. This isn't right. And of course, I wasn't the only one that had been through this, but perhaps a little bit centricity suggested that I was. So the control obsession was in there as well, as we start to look at this idea of over-caring of self and over-caring of my environment. Over time, I decided to leave the military. I figured the country was safe and it would go on without me. I wasn't sure, And clearly it turned out to not be the case because a whole bunch of wars started after I left, and you make the link. Anyway, I haven't gone back. I've figured they can handle it. I decided to get a real job, so I joined KPMG. That wasn't a joke, that was true. And for me, this was like a stunning place to go. Wow, what a world. I will never forget walking down the Paris end of Collins Street thinking, I've made it. The suit, the business card, the mobile phone. I mean, really, tell me, does life get any better than this? I'm open to ideas. I'm seriously open to ideas. And so it's interesting when you start to move into this space, how a number of other pieces start to kick in. And look, I wouldn't say I play this stuff too far, but absolutely the self-neglect bit. As many of you know, things get pretty high pressurised in these environments. So in some cases, what do? Drink, thank you. Who said that?
Well, that was my inside voice.
Yeah, that's okay. Sharing is good. This is a conversation. I'm happy for sharing. No, didn't drink. That was the Air Force time, yeah. But neglect of self, so perhaps similar. Lack of exercise, poor sleep, all-nighters to get the client's work done, all of this stuff that I know you've had history of, no question. But also some level of, entitlement as well that kicks in. Not a huge leap to get into a place of contempt when we start to undercare about others and find ourselves in this detached space. And I wouldn't say that was too extreme, but I come from a bit of a long line of it. In our country town, this is a country town of 10,000 people. I'm not talking a small town, I'm talking 10,000 people, right? Our family was pretty well respected. And I'm teasing here, by the way. But there was some sense of everybody knows our family. Well, yeah, that's a pretty big fish in a small pond, isn't that interesting? But it comes with this idea of detachment and perhaps a little bit of entitlement. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with KPMG, spent a lot of time then with Heinz, moved into corporate, similar sorts of journeys. And a few years into my time with Heinz, I started experiencing some symptoms. And eventually I got to go and see a doctor, but not immediately. It took me a couple of months, I think. And eventually I got to go and see a doctor and insisted that I go for a scan rather than the sinus tablets that he was suggesting that I should take. And so off I went, in a very naive way, to have a brain scan to understand why was I falling to my knees when I blew my nose. And it didn't take long to read the report that was supposed to be sent to the doctor but was given to us to realise that my fourth hat was coming my way. On the 8th of January 2002, I was diagnosed with a grade 3 brain tumour. 2.5 years was the prognosis, and even back in 2002 it was possible to do some Google searching to work out what these big words meant. Anaplastic astrocytoma. 3 kids, eldest 5. You can imagine the enormity of this news for us, for me. Our kids sort of kind of not really across it at this point. We carefully managed that. But in a way, we carefully managed the whole thing using all of the principles that we used so effectively in the past. Let's keep this really objective, keep it clinical. Let's see what the options are, research it to an inch of its life, but let's keep it nice and detached. Good strategy, wouldn't you suggest? It was only when a good friend of ours whose husband had died of a brain tumour when she was pregnant with her first child was when we told her the news. It was her emotional reaction that really catapulted us out of naivety into some sense of realisation. Absolute time for change, absolute time for reflection, absolute time for what is this all about? What I didn't realise at this point was at this stage the medical system was broken. Has anybody realised this yet? Has anybody worked this out? Yeah. So I thought it was perfect, you know, other than the sinus tablet thing. And so at this point we're headed off to see a neurosurgeon to find out what we needed to do. And before we knew it, he was marketing to us that his wares, but saying don't go to that one, stay with me. So we ended up interviewing 3 or 4 neurosurgeons before we picked the one with the smallest hands and a sense of humour. And then eventually off we trotted 2 weeks later to lie on the table and have brain surgery. Radiotherapy, brain surgery, life is good-ish. In a way, very easy for me, very difficult for my wife, because she now had 4 children that she was taking care of with little control. One of the best things I did, and it was on advice from a few people, was to head off and spend some time reflecting. And I did this with a chap by the name of Ian Gawler, who as at March this year I now sit on the board of the Gawler Foundation, which is such a fantastic institution that is making a huge difference for people that are going through cancer. And the reflection that I was able to do there was just life-changing for me. I remember a couple of things. One, we did a thing called a communication exercise. And this was you'd be paired up with one person each day. It'd be a different person. And Ian would write 3 questions up on the board. What do you like least about your cancer? What are the implications? And you go through these answers to this other person. They couldn't touch, they couldn't comfort, they couldn't do anything. You just had to answer. And the reality is you didn't answer, you just sobbed and tried to relate to it. But perhaps the most, for me, the strongest point of breakthrough was the art therapy we did on this program. It was just fundamental and just incredible sense of debrief from that therapy that says, I'm actually on the wrong path. And it just came out so clearly in this reflection that said, what are you doing? Fundamental change needs to happen. And that's what I thought about doing. So on the back of that, I changed my exercise, my nutrition, my lifestyle, my mindset, my spirituality, and ultimately I changed my career. I reckon along the way, this is only something that's sort of kind of evolved recently, but became so obvious to me that life actually isn't that complex, is it? No matter what happens to you, life isn't that complex. There's really only a couple of options left for you, aren't there? It's only 4 options. I don't want to make it too simple, but are there more? Are there more than 4 options? Tell me if there's more. And some of them are functional, some of them are dysfunctional. Some of them are passive choices, some of them are active choices. And the one that I liked the most, at least initially in this process, was the rumination one, or the one that I like to call the bitch and moan cycle. And boy, did I have some fun here. It's a really good one. Does anyone use this one? It's quite good. And so, you know, you're going through drama, and what do? Circle the target. Rumination, can't sleep, worry, frustration, contempt, a nice, comfortable place to be. What's the problem with rumination cycle? You go nowhere and you suck others into the vortex, no question. And perhaps a more useful place to go is this place of making peace. And I've got to say, this is something that I think my wife and I did pretty quickly into the journey through this brain cancer piece. And it was, I think we came to terms with it pretty quickly. I'm not saying I didn't regress into the rumination, sleepless, tear-filled nights, but I think we did make peace fairly quickly, because if you can't make peace, you can't move forward. Perhaps positive action would define resilience, but also defines this idea of assertive humility, which I'm going to come back to shortly. What can I possibly do? What's in my control? What am I going to do differently? I mean, we think about this in terms of the road rage scenario. Make peace, I'm okay with it. I just let it go. Positive action, I follow that person home and I give them some suggestions to say, maybe you weren't aware that you cut me off in the traffic, I just wanted to let you know. Now, it's just helpful, positive behaviour. But of course, there's one more option, and that is to take negative action, to follow them home, kill their children, and just feel pretty good about that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that. But when we start to look at this choices model, to me, this is one of the key enablers that I felt allowed me to move out of this ego trap and start to embrace this idea of assertive humility, which is where I'd like to go now. And so as we start to look at this idea, it's not just choices, it's not just mindfulness, it's also energy, it's also perspective, it's also courage, it's also being willing to be vulnerable, that give us some chance of moving up to this level from stagnant consciousness to this place of assertive humility. There's all of these factors happening. And the nice thing about getting to assertive humility, I believe, is number one, you never get there, and number two, when you do get there, by definition you haven't, and you're starting again. So it's quite a journey, which makes it quite fun. As we do start to look at this definitionally, this is how I put it forward, as succinctly as I could, to say this is egoless, courageous, values-based thoughts and actions for the greater good. It sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? Anybody put their hand up to say, yep, I reckon I'm there? Did anybody? Yeah, cool. Yeah, great. And it's okay to say that, because you know what? Perhaps we are, for some of us. For many of us, it is that ongoing journey that requires huge investment, I think, but ultimately becomes easy, because it is who we become. I reckon I've spent the last 10 years, 11 years, 12 years working just on this. When I headed off to see Ian Gawler, my wife said to me, while you're there, why don't you explore your spirituality? Now, I grew up a Catholic, right? Any other Catholics in the room? Just let me check to see the audience. Yep, you've put your hand up a couple of times, maximum, be careful. And I didn't really know what this word meant, ironically. But you know what? The last 12 years has been about that exploration around how the hell do you get to this place of egolessness? Even hard to pronounce it. So, any comments, by the way, before I do start to unpack it a bit more?
I was going to say, if it wasn't for the two major events that occurred in your life, how would you, where would you believe you'd be right now?
So if it wasn't for the two major events in my life, where would I be? I would like to think I would have got there eventually. Does that help? Yeah. And I think I would like to think that. But I reckon it would have taken a hell of a lot longer, no question. In the work that we do more broadly at the Resilience Institute, it's very clear in the people that we talk to, the experiences of senior leaders, it's very clear that most growth comes through adversity/trauma. Would that be the case for everyone in the room? I know somebody's heading off to Fiji shortly. You know, Jackie, you're going to have a fantastic holiday. but not a lot of growth, correct? It's like, oh boy, I just grew as a person when I was in Fiji, fantastic. Well, actually, probably not. Great thing to do, but most growth actually happens when you're going through this sort of event. Does it have to? I would hope not. I would hope not. I hope there are ways to accelerate that through awareness, the mindfulness, and a lot of the options that we're talking about here in terms of some of those enablers. Yeah. Okay, let me take this a little bit further and do start to add some dimension to it. I do put a top layer on here because I think as we start to look at the intrapersonal and interpersonal, there's very much an implication for what I see going on internally and how do I better work with myself, as well as how do I invest with others, or social investment if you like. I'm going to talk more about compassion in a second because I think it is a fundamental component of this topic. In fact, it's probably the topic that I've explored the most over the last 10 years has been around compassion. Purpose, of course, is up here. If you haven't got a sense of what is your ikigai, of where you're going, what is your contribution, I think it's very hard to lift out of this ego-based, self-centered position. But I would also suggest that when we're looking at purpose, it's not self-purpose, it's actually contribution and spiritual purpose. The strengths piece, I know that's been talked about a lot in a lot of different areas. Again, absolutely fundamental. How do I operate with assertive humility unless I've got good understanding of my strengths and weaknesses, but particularly my strengths and how I can use them to add to that purpose? Do we like the word equanimity? Who's across this word? It's some people aren't, some people are. It's one of my favourite words, and it's a word that, if you're not aware of it, sort of means I'm equal to the task. I haven't failed in my whole life, really. Why would this situation be the undoing of me? Every potential failure has been a learning. I'm okay going into this situation. I'm okay with my world. That's a pretty nice place to be, isn't it? And it's very much this idea of assertive humility. On the other side, it ultimately does lead through to this idea of positivity, trust in relationships, absolute gold, of course, and presence. And presence says, I do walk into a room, not to be arrogant, but to make a difference. And what I've got to say is impactful, is insightful, is a contribution. And people want to hear it. People want to know what you've got to say. Again, not in an arrogant sense, but I'm certainly not the wilting violet that some people might think humility is about. I don't think so. Let's explore the compassion one a little bit. A few of you have seen this, those clients that are in the room from the Resilience Institute. This is our compassion model that starts to get rid of some of the poor language we use around this topic. And I think it's incredibly important to get this right. When we're starting to look at how do I socially invest with others, so again, this is the interpersonal aspect of assertive humility. Well, which way do I go? One way to go is ignorance. That's quite a good way to go. And what's going to keep me here? Absolutely, I'm stuck down in that ego trap. No question about that. I'm so internally focused as opposed to able to want to know where others are up to. What else can get in the way of me going beyond ignorance? I'm not going to ask who's ignorant in the room because I don't think there are any, otherwise you wouldn't be here. What can stop you going beyond ignorance? The most common thing in our society these days. Indifference. Could be indifference, which we're going to come to, so that's an addition to it. What else? Fear. Sorry? Fear. It can be fear, yeah, so I'm actually leaning out. Yep, what else? More common? Lack of time. Takes time, doesn't it? I want to stay in the moment with that person if I hope to go beyond ignorance. Well, pretty time consuming, isn't it? You know, they probably haven't even got much to say anyway, right? And so I'm pretty busy. Talk to me, I'm just finishing this email quick. I mean, really, hard to actually get there. Others say, actually, I'm going to go quite the opposite extreme. I want to overcare about where you're coming from. And this is back to that, again, ego position that I was describing before about overcaring on the interpersonal sector. And the problem with sympathy, of course, is it disempowers the other person. I'm there to save the other person. But it also could mean that I avoid conflict with that other person. Why? Why would I avoid conflict with that other person?
You don't want to upset them.
I don't want to upset them. My marker of success is how many friends on Facebook. It's not respect, it's friends on Facebook. And so as long as that's me as a leader, is to want to be liked, then I'm going to be the sympathetic leader, as opposed to the leader that is happy to have clear boundaries and operate with compassion. And so when I do interact with others, it is very much for the greater good, and it is very much this sense of egolessness position on how do we move forward together. So this is the caring position as opposed to the saviour position. If you're thinking this is a little bit tricky, we'll get to some easy options in a second, but empathy is the underpinning of this. And again I mentioned this as an enabler. If we look at the ego-based components, here are some other options for you. You don't have to go for compassion if you don't want to. These are much easier. And, you know, people can become a bit of a hassle. Would you agree? These ones, indifference, as you mentioned, is quite an easy option. I just want to get the task done. That's fair enough, isn't it? We're busy around here. I think contempt is good. In fact, Paul Ekman would suggest it is the fastest growing emotion in our world. How big is your flat screen TV? I want to know that because mine's pretty big. Contempt, moral superiority. Again, this undercaring about others that we were talking about before disables my ability to have compassion and help people grow. But the last one I think is antipathy. Not that this would exist in your organisations, but this is an active negative where I'm intimidating, bullying, prejudicing, biasing, all of these things that we know only happen in those dodgy organisations, not yours. So it should be fine. But it's interesting when you start to look at this to say, where do you play as a leader? Where does your organisation play? Is it in this place of compassion based on good empathy, or do you find yourself in some of these ego-based territories? Any questions on this before I move on?
It creates a conflict within the individual where you've got working for an organisation who's working in the ego space,
Yeah.
and you're trying to be in the other space. That's where the conflict, for me.
Right. It definitely can be a conflict. So where there is an organisational structure that might actually reinforce some of these, I think is what you're saying. So these ego positions, when you are trying to operate in the other, I would suggest that doesn't change the game. And this is the assertive part of assertive humility that says, I still operate with that intent. And the extent to which that doesn't cut the mustard, well, guess what? I'm playing in the wrong pot. Is that the analogy, or did I miss the... Anyway, you get the idea. It really is fundamental. And I think compassion can still be order of the day, even in that tough environment. Why? Because this is also called tough love. This is not soft love. This is where I do drive through that situation and say, this is not how I operate. This is not me. Does that make sense? So hopefully it's starting to tease out some of this, like this tension between assertiveness and humility. They actually do go together if they're values-based, which hopefully that's the key point. Okay, so back to this idea of who lives with assertive humility. Who would be your nominees for a badge of assertive humility? Who would you put forward?
Dalai Lama.
Dalai Lama, cool, yes. Mandela, has to be, Mandela, yeah.
I'm not sure about this, but Ted Turner.
Go on.
I saw an interview of him yesterday, and he's a billionaire, but he's actually now set out to do a lot in the environmental space, and he's declared that he's giving away $1 billion, and what he wants to do is create a legacy and not just be rich.
Great, and we can say there'd be a bunch or a cluster of entrepreneurs who have become billionaires who then give back to various causes. You know, Gates and so on would be another example of that. Yeah, great. Who else? Sorry, Gandhi, yeah. So you're really going top shelf. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, good. Who else? Children. It's interesting. Do you want to talk more about that? Why would you say children?
I don't think they're hung up with, I don't think they've developed strong egos yet, so they're free spirits to a certain degree. They're willing to help others without wanting any payback necessarily.
Yeah.
So generally, and they're generally pretty courageous on anything. So.
And I think in general that would be quite an interesting. That's a quite an interesting statement. I think it also find in some cases it would be the opposite. Does anybody have a power god 5-year-old in their family? Yeah. And somehow they've already picked this up. I don't know where they've got it from, but they've picked this up from somewhere. Maybe they read about it or something. But others, you're right, absolutely. It's all about play. It's all about getting out there without any question of what do you think about me? I really don't care. I'm just being. And in a way, that's what this is about. How do I live life as I am, as opposed to what will people think of me? So it's interesting. Some kids absolutely nail that. I think our second eldest would be the classic example of that. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, for sure. So let's perhaps even go through a couple of examples that I had on. Yeah, please.
Just a statement. It's quite interesting what you're relating to unthink the way that we've been brought up to think,
yes.
And the way we've been brought up to forget what we were. So, if you ask, in a prep class, how many people can draw, or how many kids can draw, whole prep class will say, well, we can all draw.
Yes.
But if you ask here how many people can draw, you probably will have 1 or 2 person.
Yeah.
So what it says to me is to come back to these, for some people creativity, or for others will be, well, remember when, once upon a time, the thought you had. So try to unthink the way the society, your companies.
Really like that. I really like that. And if we come back to this chart, this idea of equanimity is based on purpose and strengths. When do you most take on that childish playfulness, that place of being at your best, in that state of flow that Csikszentmihalyi talks about? It's when you're playing to your strengths with strong purpose. And we'd all have places where we go for that. It might be skiing down the ski slope, it might be, you name it. Can we get more of that? And that's very much where this thing comes together, for sure, for sure. So let's have a look at a few. This is my hit parade. See if you agree or disagree. I think a few of them are probably no-brainers. Do we know this guy? Dr. Charlie Teo heads the Cure Brain Cancer Foundation. It's just been renamed. I'm hoping to make ground on brain cancer cure over the next 15 years. Amazing guy. Do you know this person? Yeah, Isle. Yeah, so incredible, even at her age, or because of her age, out there saying, why can't I get out there and make a difference on this thing? Of course I can. Who's going to stop me, even where I live? Well, that's a pretty brave and courageous pursuit, I would suggest. This chap who I have a lot of respect for, Ian Gawler, Australian of the Year last year. Do you know what this guy does for his time? Travels through the country working with Aboriginals to help liberate them from poverty and hardship. Again, a totally giving guy, unbelievable. This guy you might know of. He hasn't got his cap on, but you can still recognise him without the cap. We've already spoken about Gandhi. But you've always got them all. Maybe there's a few more in this room, I don't know. This person, these Gates, thoughts? Yes or no? Yeah, perhaps. Some would say no, some would say yes. Gee, you've got to be rich to have this stuff, haven't you? Perhaps, I don't know. And so let me put this one in your pipe to smoke. What do you think about this one? Assertively humble, what do you think? Some would say absolutely yes, particularly when you look at where she has come from, what she's created, and what she's giving back, particularly for women. Yeah, incredible, really, when you think about that. Anyone else we've missed? Yeah, please.
Steve Irwin.
Yeah, Steve Irwin, yeah. And, incredible, really. A great example of that.
And so where done well.
We could go on, and you know, a bit like the comment here before, let's go for less famous as well, because guess what? It's not just the famous ones that have this thing. And often it is the unsung, well, don't call them heroes because we're talking about humility. All right. Yes, please.
I actually feel uncomfortable seeing this, and the reason being, we're talking about public personas in what people do,
Yes.
but we actually do not know their intentions
Yes.
and their inside world, and this is why I question, and that's all I'm saying, some of these people, because sometimes it's about the look,
Yeah.
but we don't know their big DNA behind it.
And I totally agree with you, and I think that is really the bigger picture here. And again, I keep coming back to this to say there is a left-hand side and a right-hand side to this concept. It's not just the right-hand side. What's going on underneath? And we think about compassion. It's not compassion unless it is about the greater good, based on values. And so I don't know, is that person being compassionate or are they not? It's a fair point to dispute this and challenge. But then again, you'd say, who am I to judge? And where am I up to? And what am I doing to move closer to that space? Would be perhaps an even bigger question. So you've all done, some of you have done self-assessments using, and I have to say, our new, brand spanking new, Assertive Humility diagnostic. How many of you have done this? I think it's about 60. How many of you have got your reports with you? I know they came out a little bit later than we'd hoped. They will be in your inbox when you do get back, which for some of you will be an exciting thing to do when you get back to your desk, looking for that email amongst the other 300. Just delete all the others and save that one. So I'm not going to go through your individual results unless anyone wants to put theirs up. That's not the intention. But what I first of all want to say around the assessment is, as I was working through designing this tool, I was getting really excited about it. I was thinking, wow, this is just coming together beautifully. And then as I read more and more research papers, particularly one research paper, it said you can't do a self-assessment on humility. Go figure. It sort of kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And so there's no doubt that when we start to wrong place, when we start to look at this concept of assertive humility, self-assessment is a little bit of a paradox potentially. I am very humble. Just ask me. I'm not humble at all. Well, is that false humility? What is that? You tell me. So I guess what I would also challenge you to think about, because actually what did the choices model say for me to do? Give up the assessment tool? No. Design a 360. That's the way to go. And so that is now open to you if you'd like to do that. Please let us know if you'd like to go through the 360 view of that. Why? Because it will give you a much stronger view of where you're up to. The nice thing about having done the self-assessment already, that's in the bag. Now you just need to nominate your 360 reviewers and we'll do the comparison for you, and opportunity for a conversation there, please. But let's have a little bit of a look at the tool that you have had a go at for most of you. I looked at a number of subscales here to sit underneath it, and it comes from the model that we've been working through. First subscale is that of self-worth. It's very difficult to have assertive humility unless you've got this one on board. You think about the ego trap, so much of it is around this flagging level of self-worth. Self-worth doesn't come from others, it comes from within. And how do we strengthen this as a bedrock so we can have assertive humility? Not arrogance, confidence, equanimity, these sorts of things. Second subscale is the trust and compassion. Probably spent enough time on that, but to say, if we think about self-worth as the intra, this is the personal, how am I playing on that? Do I truly choose to care about others? No. Do we really, truly choose to care about others. Number 3 is, again, fundamental, particularly to the humility one. Am I others focused or am I self-centered? Why is contempt the fastest growing emotion on this planet, according to Paul Ekman? Potentially due to me, that goes from a lack of external centricity. Is that a double negative? I don't know, you work it out. The 4th subscale that I adopted was that of perspective, because a lot of our assertive humility is destroyed when we forget what this thing's all about. Has anybody worked out this whole thing as a bit of a ride through life and we have fun and we make a contribution? Or is it about, have I got this thing ready for tomorrow, have I cleared my emails, and you know, it's not even brain surgery, but I'm going to get very serious about it. And so this sense of perspective has to be on there somewhere. And then the last one is, how do I choose to resolve conflict? This is much more in the assertiveness scale. Do I do this aggressively? Do I do this passively and avoid? Or do I do this, again, with strength? There's an overlap here, a little, around the compassion piece. So they're the 5 subscales, and I will unpack these a little bit more in terms of your results, as well as getting to the overall results. Who's keen to see some of the data? Does anybody like to see some of the data? Yes. And look, most of it says, you know, really, you guys are just sensational. And if you take that on as an accolade, then we've got even bigger problems. You need to go make sure you do the 360. Maybe that's the solution. Yes, please, jump in.
If you do this in 3 months or 6 months,
yes,
okay, so how can I... Will there be a difference because of what you're going through life?
Yeah.
Or is that pretty constant in your core DNA?
Yeah. So you're sort of asking the question, are these personality traits or are these choices and behaviours that we can adopt? And I think the answer is both. It would be where the research sits, but the more recent research would say, with all of this stuff, there's a huge learnability to what we're talking about. And there's no doubt around the whole neuroplasticity piece, we are continually rewiring the brain. And I've got to say, the last 12 years in my life has been rewiring my brain much more in this direction. You can do it. And you know, I absolutely notice, and others notice, the difference around each one of these by the effort I've taken to do that. I'm not saying I'm there, but it's doable. Not easy. Easier to do it at 5 than at, won't mention ages.
Where is someone's natural emotional intelligence sitting? So, you know, how does that play? Some people are obviously more aware, or is it easy for someone? Or
I think, can I come back to this discussion here, which says that we look at the key enablers for assertive humility. Number 1 on there is self-awareness, both emotional, cognitive and spiritual. And so I do truly make this point that this is a shift of consciousness. This concept is a shift of consciousness. And so if you can't see what you can't see, it's very hard to do that, which is again back to the earlier question, does it take an enormous crisis to start to see what you can't see? Possibly. So there's no question, the emotional intelligence piece, the cognitive awareness piece, the mindfulness piece is part and parcel.
But just on that, so you had your father passing away, which is very traumatic.
Yeah.
My father passed away. But did it take a personal crisis within yourself having brain cancer to really shift? Or had you started shifting it at that younger age, in your 20s when your father passed away?
Look, the reality is, so how I started shifting before the cancer, reality is I started shifting when I was born, and there's no doubt about that. And I did not mean to paint a picture of gee, hat, and gee, wow, how nasty was my mother telling me to go outside and play. I mean, just unbelievable. Stop doing your homework. How nasty was she? Unbelievable. I mean, this stuff started right back into those early years. No question. It's been an ongoing journey. Did my father's death have it? For sure. But perhaps the personal, quite defined. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you could unpack the linkage that you see between trust and compassion, because I would think that at the sympathy end of the continuum, that starts to become a little unglued.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the link between trust and compassion is unbelievably strong. The link between trust and sympathy is unbelievably strong in the opposite direction. And so when we're looking at empathy and compassion, look at compassion in particular, this is where I can be trusted, where necessary, to make that call that I need to make. Think about this in a leadership context. I know there's bad news that needs to be delivered. Bad news from the individual's perspective, from the organisation perspective. This is where we need to go. The greater good says we need to go here. I am strong enough as a leader. I care hugely as a leader to actually say it as it is. Yes, I will do it in a caring and compassionate way, but you won't hear there's news from somebody else. I'll be the one that comes forward and says, this is where we're up to. Or your performance at the moment just isn't cutting the mustard. How can we work to shift that performance over time to improve that? That's a compassionate conversation, as opposed to sympathy. I just avoid the conflict, or I pretend that it's all okay. And there's a big surprise in the end. One, lack of respect, destruction, lack of trust, weakness. Other, trust, respect, moving forward. To me, it's a very clear link. It almost defines the two. All right, let's get into some of I know you've done a beautiful job of deferring me going through your results. I quite like that. Don't think I didn't notice. All these questions start to come forward. We've got to, let's procrastinate. No, we're going to get there. So let's have a look at some of these. I thought I'd do a little bit of the bottom up, so pick out actually some of the questions rather than look at the overall results for your subscales. And I'd also point out again, this is a self-assessment. So is it right? Of course it's perceived. But as I've already said, how does that match with what other people are seeing as well? So it's actually both that are important. So this is one view. And this is how you see yourself on the front. Hopefully that's readable. I've let you a little bit of time to digest this. On the front of compassion and conflict resolution. So I've just pulled out 3 questions out of I think there was like 39 or 40 questions in the database. Number 1, my decisions are value-based and for the greater good. And 5 represents that almost always type dimension around this question. What does this say? It says, well, nice profile, really like that. And so this is very much that intention piece of, and some of you have already said this is how I interact with my world. I do it with good intention. I happily have tough conversations when someone has behaved or performed poorly. Now this is a little bit more of a mixed bag, isn't it? And look how those two actually ask a question, do they not? If I am operating well on the left-hand answer, how is it that I lean out of the right-hand answer? Because the extent to which I don't happily have those conversations suggests much more of a sympathy interaction. And so on the right-hand side, I would argue we've got a behavioural question. On the left-hand side, an intention question. How do those two come together? Please.
I'm curious about the choice of the word happily. If you had said willingly, I would have had a quite different answer.
Good. We'll take that on notice, and version 3.8 will hopefully get to there. But thank you. And look, I do put it forward to say this is an evolving tool, and happy for suggestions, so thank you. Happily. But my pushback to you would be to say, in an assertive, humble way, that when I am operating with compassion, I will happily do that because I know it's in their best interests and in the organisations. Yeah, I don't mean you're rocking in there going, whew, can't wait for this. Imagine how much fun this is going to be. And the bottom line also relates to this same piece, does it not? I can quickly overcome anger at work at home by having compassion for the other person. Good luck with this one. Isn't this one of life's challenges? Who has children? Yeah, excellent. I imagine you do this. Your child is acting up, you feel this rage coming up through your body, and you think, wow, what an opportunity I have in life to nurture this child through to adulthood. I love them so dearly, and I can only hope to encourage them back into a state of happiness. Is anyone doing this? Challenging, yes. A lot of the time, some of the time, none of the time. Well, it's a little bit of a mixed challenge. But again, in busy days, as we all have, how do I do this more often? This is assertive humility. And let's pick some others. The obsessions. So let's come back down to the ego model again. Here are some of the obsessions. How did you travel on the obsessions? I believe that life should be fair and reasonable. There's that data I mentioned before. Here it is. You can't back off from it. You said it, not me. Only one of you said, actually, it ain't, and reality is it shouldn't and couldn't, and the more I think it should, the more I'm going to be a little bit upset with life. Right-hand side. I can quickly make peace when adversity occurs and see the underlying opportunity. This is Choices model. Again, good opportunity there. I get concerned about my future, finances, relationships, health, happiness. Is that a reasonable result, do you think? What do you think? Shouldn't we be? I mean, that's a big number, isn't it? 34 of you spend quite a lot of time on worrying about the future. Do anyone want to say who they are? Who are you? Yeah, cool. And so this is the idea, or this is the challenge many of us face, to say, how do I work through that in a resilient and assertively humble way to say, okay, what can I control? How do I get the information that I need and communicate with others and lead others? The extent to which I spend too much time here actually doesn't help anyway. Isn't that right? We know this. Point in time though, interesting to see that. Yeah. I experience frustration when I fall short of personal expectations. Does anybody do this? We know some of you do. Again, this is an obsession. What should I do instead? Learn to laugh at myself, go and play golf, I don't know. But the extent to which frustration is healthy, yes, there's a level of that, but to its extreme, debilitates performance and actually starts to beat yourself up. Again, ego piece. Are the dependencies? I feel welcome in this room because some of you also grew up with this overcaring position. Everyone like the double, triple negative of this question, probably needs a bit of work. I don't overcare about others' opinions of me. At the moment, there's not one person in this room who's in that space. Yeah.
Would this, and we're all above 30, would this question and the scale be significantly different if it was a poll of 25-year-olds?
Yeah. So I reckon this is the exciting piece around this tool, I think, is over time to start collecting that sort of data. Seniority, age, gender, any other dimensions we can go with? Probably all the standard stuff. We can culture for sure to see what are the impacts. What's your hypothesis?
I think under 30 would care a lot about others' opinions of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, should we look at this generationally as well? Interestingly, we apply the gen piece as well. In the teens, I think this would be through the roof as a drama. Back to the younger, care about what? Interesting to have a look. What else we got? Nice to see. Nice to see. 55 of you will not use imitation to ensure that I get more A expediently. The person that did get a number 1 here, please do not show yourself if you want to get It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. No judgment, no judgment. All right. Let us... there is one more. And that is, this is a centricity one, which I think is interesting. And I'll let you reflect on this one, but it talks about this idea of, the first one is a question of what's most important to me Is it the external or the internal? An interesting spread that puts it across the board. It's not to say that you are self-centred, it's to say that there's an interesting spread. Good to see that there's a huge leaning towards the right-hand side. And perhaps that's endemic of this sort of group that would come together to this sort of event, that is about making a contribution. The other piece, what do you make of that? What was this question trying to tackle? Sorry? It's definitely on the fairness piece. Yep. Yep. But it was also taking a leaning towards definitely ego around entitlement. Yeah. So, you know, to what extent do I feel entitled to this thing? And the extent to which I hold on to entitlements holds me back from assertive humility. All right, let's. Here's the wrap-up result. You know, is this useful? I'm not so sure it is at the moment. What have you got here? You've got a result. You know, interesting to know. You want to write this down. As a group, your centricity is 3.8. Did everyone get that down? I'm sure you're writing that down furiously. Not. What's going to be more useful as we start to see 360 data coming in against this, and we start to see database across bigger volumes of people and so on coming in against this. Then we're going to get into some useful stuff. And we certainly intend to publish against this in the media and so on. But it gives you a bit of an idea. Interesting, the perspective one is an opportunity for many people, or as an average. How do I keep perspective on where things are up to? Again, I'd say, what is this one? What is the overall result useful at the moment? It will become useful, again, through those other pieces. As an overall picture, you guys are doing pretty well according to where this tool sits. Are there any questions before we do start to open it up to, or head towards a close? Oh, please.
So what you've showed us is a lot of how you can understand self and be aware of what we need to have in order to move to assertive humility.
Yes.
Where's the piece around the how,
yes,
rather than the awareness?
Yeah. And if I come back to the slide I've kept coming back to, which perhaps could have had some more detail, the word enabler up there is where I try to talk to that. And when you start to look at the enablers around the shift, number one, again we talked about, was mindfulness and self-awareness. So how do I spend time building my self-awareness? That could be through meditation, it could be through the various mindfulness activities that you can be doing more generally. I mean, there's so much work that you can do in that space. And without that, you will struggle to, I think, personally, it was my experience, to make some shift. Another area that I think is up for grabs as an enabler is empathy and gratitude. Again, if we're talking about assertive humility, the humility piece definitely points towards understanding others better. What is now known and is absolutely clear, this is a learnable competence. So again, doing work on empathy as a cognitive competence is absolutely possible. Gratitude, is it possible to increase gratitude? Yeah. How many of you are working on gratitude at the moment? Yeah. And again, this is an underpinning. Lots of research on that. Why are we researching gratitude? Not sure. Vulnerability and courage. Can you learn to be more vulnerable and have more courage? I think experientially, yes. It's probably not something that you read though. It's about getting out there and having a go. And perhaps getting this idea of it's okay to fail. Has anybody failed recently? Can I get some examples? Give me an example. Good. Give me an example of some failures you might have had. Who's had a failure they're happy to share? Yes, please.
Not a big one, but I've failed to look after my own health recently because I've been under the pump. So, and I'm aware of it, and I'm trying to work back towards it. But what you were saying before about the neglect.
Yeah. And so to me, that's an example of how do you learn to, one, be happy with vulnerability, but also courage is actually to experience failure and rebuild from that. Energy and calm, you can't be operating from a position of neglect if you hope to grow in this space. I've got no doubt about that. Unless you've got good sleep happening, good nutrition, good relaxation practice, good exercise, you're not even in a position to move through that.
And it's back to what you were saying before, like what affects our behaviour, like when you're saying the time thing, but when your cup's really empty, you find yourself behaving in ways that aren't true to who you are.
Absolutely, and you are stuck in this ego trap. The last one I'd add is around exploring the beliefs and choices piece. What are the beliefs that you hold to be true that are not allowing you to evolve? And that's certainly something I had to explore. And some of those obsessions are some of those beliefs, by the way. I don't know whether that helps or not, but there's so many things there that's actually practical ways. Even getting somebody who's going on the journey with you or somebody who's been there can be very helpful to do that.
I wonder whether you might want to add forgiveness in the Fred Luskin sense of the word forgiveness as a learnable skill that's an enabler.
Yeah, and I think that works both intra, for sure, no question about that. And in a way, it's why Mandela's up there, and it is absolutely embodied in this idea and somehow linked into the compassion piece. Yeah, please. So the question, if you didn't hear, is can you have, how does resilience and assertive humility fit together, and can you have one without the other, and so on? I think they are strongly linked. When we talk about resilience, we talk about, actually they're inextricably linked, courage, creativity that somebody mentioned there earlier, ability to bounce, ability to play to one's strengths, having a positive impact on others. All of these elements is how we would define resilience. It sounds like there's a huge linkage here. This assertive humility idea is at that spiritual level. I've got no question that this is about, it's not about getting rid of ego, it's about actually transcending to this next level. And our ultimate view of resilience is not about coping, it's actually about reaching out and putting your whole spirit into action. This is one version of that. Yes, please.
When you talk about assertive humility, yes, it is absolutely spiritual, but I think also what's spiritual, what's underlying all this, you can have all the enablers, it goes back to choice, which is an absolute spiritual system, belief, principle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that you've got assertive humility, and underpinning all that, everything is choice.
No question at all. And do we make good choices? Well, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Either way, we learn from them, hopefully. Yes, please.
Just going back to the slide on your examples of people living with assertive humility and linking it to your white paper where you've noted, and I think you're right, that assertive humility is a space that women tend to more naturally play in and could be a leadership strategy for women.
Yeah.
I find it interesting how many men you've put as living with assertive humility. Would that suggest that there is a broader acceptance of this as a behavioural trait of strong leaders than we would see in the corporate world?
Yeah, look, it's
because when we talk about great leaders, at least 3 of those men appear in most people's lists.
Yeah. So I think it's. I should actually kill this slide and put up the true inventors of this concept, which actually females. And I don't mean that in a silly way. I mean that in a serious way. When I look at the contribution of a more I didn't mean female, but feminine leadership style that we're seeing evolving, as we're less about spears in hearts and more about heart and mind and spirit. We are shifting in this way. I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but when I spoke at a women's conference a couple of years ago, it was quite an awkward conference. It's unbelievable. Some of you guys might relate to this, that there were three of us men there and like 300 women. This is unbelievable. I imagine the ladies don't have this experience that often. And so anyway, up there speaking on careers, and it was about someone else was saying, got to behave like a man if you want to be successful in your career. Ladies, that was sort of an 80s concept, wasn't it? Were you happy that that's sort of kind of gone? And the room's going, what? This idea of assertive humility dripped off my tongue that day, just don't know where it came from, but I said, this is what we're actually here for, isn't it? It's around how do I make a difference in life and operate with assertive humility. And the response in that group was where the book got its title from. So to me, it's absolutely here. The more work that needs to be done, I would suggest, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the survey over time, could actually be on the male side to get this concept happening. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting piece. What's the most recent? It happened last week or the week before. Who's talking about women being bossy? Who's on that? Who's? Yeah, the COO of Facebook. I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? So, an assertive, humble woman is probably quite bossy, correct? I don't know. Or are they aggressive? Or which is it? Whereas, of course, if a guy is here, they're probably weak, aren't they? Or okay, good leader. I don't know. Interesting to see how that evolves. Any other comments or questions? Yes, please.
On the gender piece, I find it difficult to really link this concept, one gender versus the other.
Of course.
It's a human choice about the way that your mind operates and the way that you've been set up to either give or to take, and to know whether or not you've got the capacity to somehow make a difference to another person's world. I think it's quite justified to have as many men or as many women as whatever it is that relates to each of us that we can look to as role models. And as you said before, they don't all have to be people that we all know their faces. We know them in our communities, and we know them in our families, and we know them in our worlds. No matter what the diversity of what they are, every one of us has a capacity to do something and act in a certain way. And I don't think there's any boundaries around our history or our type or our gender that should influence a choice that we make to be able to do that one.
In total agreement with you, and the extent to which it is an excuse is unacceptable. And if you're on the dark side of that excuse, then got some work to do. If you're on the light side of where this is up to, fantastic. What a contribution you can make, I think. I think we should start to wrap. I probably have something amazing in terms of a finish here, just to be humble, just to really finish things off. It's a comment that I quite like to make, and it does come back to the choices point again. Which road are you taking? Do you find yourself reaching out to this place of authenticity, high potential, happiness, engagement, humility, assertiveness? Or do you occasionally find yourself on this low road where I am in the ego trap, fidgeting through life? I get up, I go to work, I work, I come home, I get up, I go to work, I work, I come home. My life is just a blur. Thank you so much for coming along today. I hope it's been of use to you. I will be loitering around for a little while if you'd like to catch up. There are books for sale if you'd like to do that. You don't have to have my signature in it if you don't want to. And if you would like to participate in a 360, that's also there for you to take up. So again, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Stuart. I won't ply you with accolades because that may offend your sense of humility, but I think everyone would join me in their appreciation for what you shared with us this afternoon and what we've discussed. It's been a really good discussion and some wonderful things for people to take away. So I think we could show one more sign of appreciation for Stuart. Once again, thank you for your attendance. It's always a pleasure to host events like these and have you as guests of Deakin. Hope to see you again in the future, and I'm sure you will need to rush back to your very busy lives. We're very conscious of the humility, so thanks everyone for joining us.